Welcome to the Justice Trends Magazine Leader Profile Interview Series, the podcast where we bring you in-depth conversations with the visionaries and changemakers shaping the future of justice systems worldwide. From innovative technologies to transformative leadership strategies, this is your insider look at cutting-edge developments driving meaningful change. I'm your host, Sam Erry. As a seasoned leader and professional in justice and public administration, I bring you my experience as Deputy Minister and Deputy Solicitor General, working at the intersection of policy, technology, and societal reform. My passion? Uncovering best practices and the stories and strategies behind the leaders that are redefining the justice sector. Today, we're honored to have with us Pedro das Neves, a globally recognized authority in correctional reform and innovation, digital transformation, and the use of data and artificial intelligence in the criminal justice sector. With a career spanning more than 2 decades, Pedro has spearheaded groundbreaking projects that reimagine how correctional systems operate, making them smarter, more efficient, and above all, more humane. Pedro is the CEO of IPS Innovative Prison Systems, a research, advisory, and technology development firm specialized in justice and correctional services, and executive director of ICJS Innovative Criminal Justice Systems in North America. He's also board director of the International Prisons and Corrections Association and vice president of the U.S.-based NGO Health Through Walls, operating in the Caribbean, Africa, and South America. Pedro's academic and professional journey is equally impressive. His work bridges technology and human-centric approaches, ensuring innovation always serves a purpose. In today's episode, we'll delve into his insights, explore his vision for the future of corrections, and discuss the role of AI in shaping tomorrow's justice systems. Let's get started. Pedro, welcome to the podcast. It's a privilege to have you here. You have an impressive career working as a corrections and criminal justice systems advisor. But let's start in the beginning. How did you first get into working with prisons and probation systems? What drew you to this field?
Sam, thank you very much, first of all, for having me here and for interviewing me for this podcast of the Justice Trends magazine. My story is probably a bit different than other professionals that came up working in corrections. And so I had my first contact with prisons when I was 16. I was a volunteer. Working with other friends from a Catholic group that came to visit prisons and inmates every Saturday or every 2 weeks. And I did that until I was 18 or 19. And then, of course, after that period, when I entered university and until I started working, I never thought of coming back and being a volunteer or working in the prison anymore. Then when I started working professionally, I was working as a management consultant, and just by chance, there was an opportunity to develop a project with the Portuguese prison service. That was the first project that we ever did. Then after that, there was a second one. The first one was on leadership development and the development of operational standards for the and that involved more than 200 people, mainly with management positions at the correctional service. And after that project, another bigger project came in. That was a bit more of a transformative project that we have developed. And from there, we moved to work in Romania and then in other European countries, also in other countries in other parts of the world, like in the Middle East, in South America, in North America. So it's probably a little bit different than other people that came to work in this world.
So, Pedro, you built an extensive international career. Could you share how your international work began and highlight some interventions that were meaningful in your life and the lives of others?
I think that most of the interventions really are really meaningful for me because they're touching other people's lives. So I could talk to you about some of these projects that I mentioned that we've developed in Portugal, but also in Romania. Back in the 2008 on, And for a period of time, that was a period of large transformations in the country as well, and especially a large transformation in the correctional service. So it was a tough period because there were huge reforms going on, economic reforms, financial reforms, fiscal reforms, and where suddenly the salaries of correctional officers, for instance, they were cut. There was an intervention of the International Monetary Fund in the country, and we were working not only trying to change the way the correctional service was working, but at the same time, we were also feeling the side effects of all this transformation that was happening in the country. But even though it was amazing how the professionals that we were working with, they were able to produce change and to improve the way that they worked, and ultimately to improve the conditions of people that are incarcerated. So for me, that was a very it's a very special intervention because even though those professionals were feeling all these constraints, they could really introduce changes that were very positive. And I think that having the privilege of supporting those changes is something that really touches me very much, even today when I think about it. But I could also talk about other interventions in countries in South America, where not only the detention conditions are very difficult, but also the professionals struggle because when we think about detention conditions, we mostly think about the conditions that the inmates need to face and live in, and that's perfectly normal. Of course, we want to have the best conditions, or at least conditions that ensure the dignity for a person to be detained. But we also need to think about the situation of the professionals that also have to work in those conditions. And what I could mention projects that I've developed in countries like Guyana, where the situation back in the day was really difficult for inmates and for the professionals that had to work with in the prison service, or even in countries like Brazil. So I always feel that we are very privileged to especially in some European and in North American jurisdictions, even though we have a lot of problems, of course, and we have a lot to go through still. It's quite amazing what people can do in countries where they have to struggle for resources, and even though they can achieve very good outcomes just through their commitment. So I would say that those were some of the interventions that really touched me more during my career.
Thank you. So your journey is quite fascinating. You started your career focusing on training and organizational change, and now you're deeply involved in corrections, digital transformation, and the use of artificial intelligence in criminal justice systems. So how did this transition happen? What inspired you to expand your work into these areas?
I think it's been a bit of a natural path, I would say, at least for me. So I've always been very curious about the way technology changes our lives, affects our lives, and changes our lives, and can bring a positive impact to our lives. So, as you mentioned, I started working, in training and change management, and working to change the organizational culture of public institutions as well. And as we start to introduce technology in our daily lives and to support our operations, even to bring technology to be used by inmates in corrections, I was really curious to understand what would be the impact of these technologies. in those settings. So for me, it's been quite a natural path to follow, and understanding the impact of these technologies, and especially how we can use technology to improve the way we operate, and also the impact that we can generate in the people that we work with.
So I understand you're also the founder of Justice Trends magazine, which is distributed for free in 120 countries and visited online by more than 40,000 visitors. That is a truly remarkable accomplishment. Can you share what inspired you to create this publication and how it contributes to the global dialogue on justice and corrections? And what do you hope readers will take away from it?
Well, I think that the Justice Trends magazine, the initial idea for the magazine was really to foster dialogue and share best practices. As we moved from country to country in our professional activity, I realized that it's a bit different today, I must say. But at the time when we were talking to people in different jurisdictions, they had no idea of what was going on, sometimes even within the same country. So, I will give you an example of states that didn't know inside the same country, states that didn't know what other state was doing, or provinces that didn't know what our province would be doing, that they could use as well as a good practice, or countries in Europe that didn't really know what their neighbors were doing, and all of them were struggling with the same issues, with the same problems. So when we thought of creating the Justice Trends magazine, it was mainly an instrument to share knowledge and to share practices among the different jurisdictions, and we thought to do that by interviewing the key actors that were in fact producing change in the different jurisdictions. So we invite heads of corrections to talk about what they're doing. We invite ministers of justice to talk about the policy changes that they're trying to introduce. We interview and bring articles from renowned experts from the sector, short, and we try to keep our articles short so that decision makers can read them and understand in a quicker, because we are a bit different from an academic journal. So our articles are 3 pages long, so that people can really understand what a certain practice means, what are the advantages, and yes, if they want to know more, then they can contact the author directly or try to understand a little bit more. But the reason, going back to your question, the reason why we launched the Justice Trends magazine was to share knowledge. And what we really would like people to take from the magazine is what's going out there that we could also use in our jurisdiction. So what are other countries and other jurisdictions doing that we could really import and adapt to our own reality? How are others dealing with similar challenges, and what can we do? What can we learn from them? And also, what have we done that is interesting that we can share with others? So that's mainly what we've done. I think that to some extent we've accomplished that. We get letters from heads of service from different countries, from countries in Africa, in Latin America, in the Middle East, in Southeastern Asia, for instance. People, whenever we launch an edition, we get letters from people or messages from people thanking us for sending them the magazine. And we have to thank our sponsors as well, because we have our partners and sponsors that make it possible that we can share the magazine for free in 120 countries. So we can reach, I'm talking about the published version, the paper version, reaches out to 120 countries, and that's only possible because of our sponsors. And it's all part of this sharing of knowledge and best practices. That's the main issue there.
So I know passion is a strong attribute of good leaders. And I know that you're very passionate about learning and having pursued postgraduate education, executive education in several areas, including the ones of public policy, digital transformation, AI, at institutions like College of Europe, the MIT, and University of Chicago. So could you tell us a bit about your ongoing learning journey in this space and what drives your interest in technology today?
Okay. So my background is in a totally different area. So when I graduated in sociology, so that has nothing to do with the technology world, right? So, and when I started working with corrections, I was of course very familiar with things that have to do with inequality, with the victimization of certain groups, with social exclusion and so on. So I was very much into understanding what those concepts. I didn't know much about the criminology concepts, so I had to study, right? So that's what I did, and as I started to change my interests, and I mentioned that a little bit before, I moved a little bit into the public policy field. So I did my master's degree in that area. I started to do a PhD that I never finished in public policy, and then as my interests evolved to the technology field, not only because I wanted to understand what technology was about or the impacts of technology, but also to understand my own team. So I have a team of technology developers, a chief technology and information officer, and the developers and the project managers in the technology field. And I couldn't really understand some of the things that they were talking about. So I felt the need of going back to school and do executive courses or even postgraduate studies in the technology field. So I started in areas like digital transformation because I wanted to understand the concepts. I was aware of digital transformation from my experience in the consulting world. When we were implementing large technology projects in telcos, for instance, back in the 2000s. But I really wanted to understand a little bit more about the concepts and the processes and the technologies. And so I did studies in digital transformation and lately also in the use of AI in different sectors, so that I could also understand how can AI impact corrections, and that's what I've been mostly interested lately.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about IPS and ICJS and the journey into developing an offender management system. So the ORIS 360 IOMS is being recognized as a unique and innovative solution. So could you explain what makes ORIS 360 stand out and how it addresses the needs of the correctional systems today?
Yeah. Well, let me start by going a little bit back and telling you why we thought about it, right? So it's been more than 10 years now that we started to think of the development of such a solution, and that was mainly because talking with different jurisdictions, they would always tell us that their solutions would not fit the needs that they really had. Sometimes it was the solution, and then there was as well some resistance from the vendors about the solutions that they had. I understand that the solutions that are out there, most of them, legacy systems that have been out there, they were designed to answer the questions that we had 20 years ago and 15 years ago. So we wanted to know how many inmates we had, who they were. We are not so much concerned in responding to questions about how to reduce recidivism or how to promote the systems from crime. So the data that those systems are collecting is not the data that will help us to respond to those questions that we have nowadays. So in a simple way is those systems do respond to the questions we had back then, not to the questions that we have now and that we'll have in the future. So that means that the new systems need to collect data, and we need to reflect on the questions that we'll have in the future and collect the data that will help us respond to those questions also in the future. And that's very much what we've been doing with ORIS. ORIS is not just a solution that covers the offender journey from A to Z, from intake to release, and even when someone is serving a sentence in the community, but is also a tool that was developed to capture all the data that could be even generated by other systems, like CCTV systems, like inmate communication systems, like offender self-service systems, and that we can capture that data and use it in our OMS, and then use some AI and machine learning algorithms to make sense of that data and support decision-making of correctional professionals and decision makers. So that's very much what we're doing with the ORIS solution. And I think that some of the positive response that we're having from jurisdictions is, in fact, it results exactly from that, from the fact that correctional administrators see that what the data we collect, the way we structure the data so that it then can be analyzed and reported back to support decision making is in fact according to their needs, and I think that's that is quite different from other solutions that are out there.
Pedro, based on your experience and global perspectives and vantage point, what do you think are the main challenges correctional services are facing today? And what strategies or innovations do you believe are essential to address these challenges effectively?
I mean, the challenges are, of course, different depending on where we are, where we stand, right? So it's totally different if we are in Africa, in the Middle East, or in Asia, or if you are in North America or in Europe, right? But we, of course, we came from a pandemic not long ago, and we see the impact that the pandemic still has on correctional services. Not only because we still have some financial constraints that resulted from that, but because we couldn't really evolve and even learn of some of the innovations that were introduced during that period, and that we did not normalize after the pandemic. So, in a nutshell, I would say yes, everybody is still facing some constraints as a result of the economic problems that different governments had after the pandemic. And on the other hand, we couldn't really take advantage of some of the innovations that were introduced during that period. Give you an example. During the pandemic, because of isolation, in many jurisdictions, we brought tools to support the communication between inmates and their families. In many countries, after the pandemic, those instruments were removed. Even when we talk about phone calls, video calls, telemedicine solutions, and they were not normalized. So we did not use that opportunity that the pandemic generated in order to normalize the use of those technologies and those instruments. So this, I mean, on the one hand, we are still facing some of those constraints, financial constraints. On the other hand, in many jurisdictions, we are dealing with, with overcrowding, with an overpopulation. Again, during the pandemic, what happened was that a lot of people were released. So we didn't saw an increase in the crime rates because of that. So that meant that probably we had people in prison that could be, in fact, in the community serving their sentence. But after the pandemic, what happened is that we went back to the same practices, including the same sentencing practices. And so that means in many countries, the prison population keeps increasing. And we are dealing with issues with overcrowding and or with an overpopulation that generates overcrowding and bad detention conditions. So many countries are still dealing with that. So I would say that if you think about that pressure that overcrowding brings to very often old facilities, we see that many countries are dealing with problems in their infrastructure. They're dealing with problems with their overpopulation and their overcrowding, and they're dealing with other constraints that are very, very relevant. So I think that some of the solutions that we may think of may have to do with reducing the prison population, using alternative measures to incarceration, for instance, community measures that we've seen that are more effective in many cases than an incarceration measure. Of course, I'm not saying that people should not go to prison. What I defend is that we should only send to prison people that really need to be there when that is justifiable, which means that whoever should be has the conditions to serve a sentence in the community without putting at risk public safety, then we should decide for those measures. So this is one something that we see that should be one measure that should be implemented. The other one is that, in fact, in order for this to happen, we should really invest in risk and needs assessments that allows us to support decisions that ultimately affect people's lives, not only in the outside, but in the inside, but also on the outside in the community. So that's very much what I see around. Of course, technology also helps, and we just talked about offender management systems. If we have data being collected by proper offender management systems, then we can also support our decisions based on that data, and that doesn't happen always and in all jurisdictions. So this is also one area where we need to evolve. The other one that I would say that many jurisdictions also struggle has to do with staff training. Well, first of all, with the lack of staff, because it's more and more difficult to attract people to work in corrections, with some exceptions around the world, but that's a major issue. And the other issue is really when we have people working in corrections, how do we train them? How do we capacitate them? And then how do we retain them in that profession, right? So this is a challenge. And this is also an area where we've been very much committed to work in different jurisdictions.
Well, Pedro, thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights and experiences with us today. Your work is truly inspiring, and I know our listeners have gained valuable perspectives from this conversation. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much, Sam. The pleasure was all mine, and I hope to see you around.
Thank you. To our audience, thank you for tuning into this episode of the Justice Trends Leader Profile Interview Series. Be sure to check out more episodes for conversations with other trailblazers in the justice sector. Until next time, stay inspired and keep innovating.